Welcome back to Stay In, Stay Busy. So today we're going to be talking about the usefulness of our lived experiences. So I want to start off by saying that for everyone who's done with college exams, congratulations. For everyone who's still stuck in high school, middle school, you will get through it. It'll be okay. But today's week is a little bit different because we have an exciting event coming up this Saturday. So the Saturday that's in a couple of days is actually our leadership summit. So it's taking place online because of circumstances. So we wanted to invite anyone who's watching to attend this summit. It's going to be really great. You can participate in coming up with action plans and um, ideas on how to tackle mental health and to talk about leadership. So it's kind of what we're doing here on our weekly Stay and Stay Busy, but we are going to have, a lot more people. That's really going to change the game. So the link to sign up there is in the description. So if you're interested at all, take a look and make sure to register. So for Stay and Stay Busy, we are gonna move it in the future to a Zoom format. If you guys aren't familiar with Zoom, that just means that we're gonna be able to see each other face to face. You don't feel like showing your face, that's entirely fine. But sign up for next week in the again in the description below. So today what we're going to be talking about is we are going to be talking about our lived experiences and how they're really important with mental health, that is, our lived experiences with mental health and how that's really important for building on your leadership. It's really important because, of course, your own personal experiences can allow you to see what others are potentially going through. That's essential. And so bringing that basic empathy there, being sensitive to someone else's needs, that's really important. But I think it goes deeper than that. So I'm going to share a little bit about my own lived experiences with mental health and how that's kind of helped me to show how I've built up my leadership skills over time and how it's really about building over time and reflecting on your experiences. So I personally have had multiple episodes of depression, and this is, since a very, well, I would say young age. I'm currently 20, so to me it seems young. So since I was about 14. And so I think the fact of the matter is, like, going through that, having family who, struggle with mental health issues and just generally obstacles, not necessarily anything diagnosed, it's really important to recognize how culture of silence can really impede just being able to reach out to each other, create connections. That's something really essential that I think is lacking. And that's something that isn't just present in families, it's present in the workplace, it's present in school environments, it can be everywhere. And so when we're thinking about trying to make sure that everyone feels comfortable in a space, it's really, can I connect with this person? Can I share what's going on? Because if we don't always feel like we can, oftentimes with these types of silencers, right, where we feel uncomfortable, we don't know what to say. Maybe we've seen others, we've sensed that others have been struggling with these same things, but we truly do not know how to deal with it ourselves, and then we see them kind of shut down or avoid questions or come up with alternative stories. We sense that that is the correct way to go about things, and so it creates a culture and we replicate. We're only human, right? So maybe you all have experienced this. I know I have. I think this is something that's very common. It's not just contained to one person in one point of time, because I've heard other people struggle with this too. I think another thing is, the entire concept of when we're talking about statistics with mental health, right? We're thinking about whether you want to make change in terms of like mental health rates, or if you just want to be a leader in general. We're talking about statistics of mental health in minority communities, right? So there's this assumption, typically, and this is a false one, I'm going to say, because, research bears this out to be false. But there's this assumption that with mental health rates being higher in minority communities, that is a reflection of just what's determined, what's predetermined, and something that can't be changed. And that is something inherent in their lived experience. So that's brought to the table when you're interacting, perhaps not you as an individual, but that's brought to the table with interacting with members of another community, as well as interacting with facts and figures about and discussions about minority communities, right? We make this assumption that, their mental health is poor and it cannot be changed, when it's typically the result of the disproportionate gap, right, in mental health rates is the result of societal pressures, etc. It's not necessarily inherent in their lived experience. It's the result of greater things beyond their control. And so something that I'm going to talk about is I personally, as I said before, have depression. However, that is entirely unrelated to, and this also happens, entirely unrelated to the fact that I identify as being bisexual, right? So we have this gap here between there's certain disproportionate rates in the LGBTQ community, for example, as a result of societal pressures, infrastructural changes that are outside of your control. But then there's also just the regular mental health occurrences that you have as a result of biochemistry, genetics, etc. So you don't have to necessarily be able to tie it to one reason or one particular contributing factor. I know for me, it's not one thing in particular, but I do know what is not at play, and it's unrelated to my identity, and that's a very important discussion in terms of being a leader. In order to identify a problem, it's understanding what your coworkers, what your peers, what they are going through, and why. You don't have to understand entirely what's happening in their life, right? But being able to think outside the box and not just be like, oh, well, I know my coworker identifies as this, and drawing a connection between those two things, but being able to consider, okay, maybe their identity could be somehow indirectly connected to these obstacles they've been having, because maybe the workplace environment is not accepting of their identity, and that itself, not their identity, but the workplace environment or an intolerance of them, is causing strain upon them, and then exacerbating their mental health. And thinking outside the box instead of drawing these very simplistic connections in terms of understanding their mental health, I think that's a very advanced thing to do. It's a very essential thing when you're interacting with other people, especially when talking about lived experiences with mental health. It's a very difficult thing to do. I struggle with it. We all have our biases. We all make these instant connections, but trying to think about larger picture, that's extremely important. And so trying to understand, also, I think the next step in terms of taking your lived experience and tying it into your leadership skills is not just thinking outside the box in terms of approaching other people's stories, whether related to their mental health or not, um, as well as, bringing basic empathy. I think another basic skill that we have here is in terms of trying to work within our boundaries, right? Because mental health is something that, like any other experience, that you may or may not have had, can limit what we can do within any given day, right? For example, like if you had some sort of physical limitation, you were debilitated in some way, and you could not like properly do your job, most people would not say, oh, well, I was being lazy today. Like they would concede, yes, like I'm limited in terms of like what I can do. They would usually try to work with their employer or their teacher to figure out like how can they get it done. In the same way, I think going through the experience of having a mental health condition or a mental health obstacle, we have to consider, okay, what do we do when we feel like we're not properly living up to our expectations? So at that point, there's several different paths we can take, right? We can continue on as we are, not living up to our quote unquote expectations of what we should be doing. And we can tire ourselves out. We can continue feeling like we're disappointing people, but then not see any progress in ourselves, of course, because that usually makes our mental health problems worse. Or you can try to lower your expectations for yourself and say, it's not for me. I can't ever do it. I can't ever do what I previously wanted to do. Or we can consider ourselves in a different light, right? And try to understand, like that person who had a physical limitation of some sort, how do I change, not my expectations for myself, but achieve those expectations in a way where the work environment or the job itself is somehow altered, right? And you can, like comment if you've had a particular experience with this, or tag someone if, maybe you think that like they've done this where they've altered not their expectations for themselves and not trying to change the work that they're doing, but trying to change how they're going about it, in a way that concedes. On some days it's going to be particularly limiting, whether it's their mental health or it's their physical limitations, or just like that day they're not going to get it done, or done in the way that they want to. But it's also taking that approach and applying that to others, right? And saying, okay, like you don't, and telling that person in a way that isn't necessarily like let's say you're a teacher or you're an employer or you're, in some way you're witnessing someone trying but not succeeding, with their own expectations. It's about motivating them, but not like necessarily trying to force them to, get to that benchmark. And I think part of the thing with this is, I felt this, like, a year ago, I was trying to do like keep up with my schoolwork, and it was very hard to get to all my classes and do all of that just with experiencing these negative thoughts and these negative ideas. And so it's about sometimes looking at yourself and realizing, okay, I don't want to change my expectations, but maybe what I can do is I can change how much my expectations envelope and how I'm going to go about trying to achieve them. So, letting other people know, hey, this is where I'm at. Like, this is how much I can do. And letting others know, I think, can relieve a certain amount of burden. And also allow them to work in a way where they're helping you, they're facilitating you getting that task done. And in the same way, being a leader, if you have a peer or a friend who's trying to do something, and they don't feel like they're living up to their expectations, relaying to them, hey, like, I'm here if you ever need. And, it's always an option for them to take you up to get help when they need, whether in whatever capacity that is, in order to achieve their expectations for themselves. There is a point at which, you perhaps shouldn't have such high expectations for yourself, because like that can be sometimes like punishing or unrealistic, for any human being. So there's also that consideration. But as a general thing, if you're thinking that these expectations would normally be realistic if there were no sort of intervening situation with like a mental health or some sort of other factor, then part of it is recognizing if it is realistic for you, how do you achieve that? Because I think when we think about, a lot of people are very hesitant to say a mental health condition is disability because they don't want to feel disabled, right? Why can't you be abled? Why can't you empower yourself? Are you then saying that you cannot empower yourself? I think that is wrong. And you can empower yourself, but you can also accept, the fact that you are in some way disabled, and perhaps on some days you might not be able to fulfill all of your expectations, or you might need a little bit of help to get there. But I've experienced this. You all have probably experienced this. So if anything resonated with you in this, feel free to tag someone. And also, like, if you've used any of these techniques as a leader, using basic empathy, or trying to see the nuances in situations, or trying to consider your expectations for yourself or others, and how those may interact with your or someone else's mental health. If you feel like you've gained this from your mental health journey, feel free to comment below. Also, I want to point out, in our comment section, or our description, we linked to NAMI at UVA's mental health resource list. And so feel free to click on that. The first page is just UVA resources, but below that there are a bunch of other resources. And there's also a resource list for a kind of like guide of how to intervene in a crisis situation. I think it's super helpful. You might find it helpful as well. So always, and you can also feel free to add resources to that list. It's not comprehensive. There are many resources, there are many hotlines, there are many areas that people can find help in. So thank you all. And again, if you want to register for the next Stay In, Stay Busy, find that little link in the description below. Have a great night.